Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sheep Get Sheared Podcast, home of people, politics, and popular culture. I'm your host, Austin Creed. I want to welcome you into the show. So, this morning I want to talk about winning the war within. Now, all of us have our own unique lives, we have our own unique problems, and that's partially what makes us human. We can relate to each other on these similar problems, these deficiencies, these difficulties that we face every day of our lives. And I really want to highlight a dichotomy that exists, in my belief, within every single psyche of every human being. And that is the war on two fronts. Because make no mistake about it, you, my friend, are fighting a war on two fronts. As am I. Now, I've discovered this almost 2 years ago when I was in a mental hospital, in the military, on suicide watch. Now, I hope that that is not where you find this dichotomy to exist. But my friends, the reason I highlight this is because I firmly believe every single person fights a war externally and internally. And for you to win this war within, for you to win the war against the world, because make no mistake about it, as much as we have friends, we have family, we have people who support us, people who pray on our downfall, you are in a basically one man, one woman fight against the world, against the people on the top, against the people who attempt to control you and put you to work. Now, we fortunately live in one of the best times in the history of the world to be alive, especially if you live in America or a Western nation, but especially in America. Because despite the fact that we have problems with our government, because we do, we live in the most free society to ever exist on the face of the earth since the dawn of time. Now, you can feel free to disagree with that if you want, but I have no idea why you would even attempt to argue. Now, is there more control? Yes. However, it is encoded within the laws itself, protections that allow us to maintain an aspect of our individualism. All this to suffice to say that so many people, with all the freedoms that they have in the world, they cannot win the war against themselves. Michael Jackson even wrote a song about the man in the mirror. Philosophers from Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, they have written about this idea of fighting yourself, being in your own way. This is no new concept, but despite it not being new, so many people have such a hard time wrestling with themselves, wrestling with their shadow self. Napoleon Hill, another famous author, wrote about this concept of a shadow self. In his book, Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill talks about the opposition to the devil, which is God, and how only, I think he said 2% of people were in the opposition. Now you may ask, well, what is an aspect of the opposition? How do you know that you're in good favor with God according to his definition? He said that anyone who thinks for themselves is the enemy of the devil. Anyone who does not simply accept what is told to them, who thinks for themselves, cannot drift. Because drifters, according to the devil's definition in Outwitting the devil says the drifters are on their way to hell. In the Bible, there's this idea of the narrow road and the wide road. So many people, the wide road is easy and many people walk upon it. The narrow road is hard and few people find it. In order for you to be the few, if you're one of the few, you're probably listening to the show or watching this show. Because not many people want to hear the truth. A lot of people want to watch cute animal videos. They would rather listen to good old Democrat, Republican talking points. They want to listen to two-string banjos, not an accordion, not a harpsichord. They don't want to listen to things that are philosophical, spiritual, something that could actually force you to take accountability for your problems and say, hey, I'm sick of being mediocre. I don't want to be normal. I want to be extraordinary. I don't want to be like the ordinary schmuck out there who puts his hat on backwards, who is a lemming and no more useful than the useful idiot Lenin wrote about in his books in the Soviet Union. You know, if you really, when you start to educate yourself, and I'm not implying that if you don't look at the things I referred to, you're stupid. Don't misinterpret me. But what I'm saying is, when you start to really look at what the communists wrote in the early days, when you look at what Engels and Marx and Lenin and Trotsky and all these men and Stalin, what they wrote, you'll realize how much of it has infiltrated the Western philosophy, the Western psyche. For example, I'm not the biggest advocate of marriage. I am for informed marriage, but not the quote, traditional marriage that has been known throughout a lot of time to work, because it doesn't work anymore. Now, that is not to say that I think that you shouldn't be married at all. In fact, if the marriage laws changed, I'd be the biggest advocate for marriage, but it's not. But again, this is an example of the war, external war we like to focus on, the problems other people have that affect us. Very easy to look at. Very easy to identify. However, there's a line from a Disney movie that I really like. I believe it's from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where the Judge Frollo, the villain, the very beginning, they have this opening scene. I'd show it, but I get a copyright, so I won't show it. But suffice to say, there's this line that, there's a gypsy guy who sings the opening song. And in the opening song, he has this line that is so powerful because every person can identify with this. He said, Judge Frollo saw corruption everywhere except within. So many people, myself included occasionally, suffer from this very same phenomenon. We see corruption in every other person around us. We see how they're not intelligent, how they're wrong, how they're misguided, how they're stupid, but then fail to see how we also fail to measure up to that same standard that we oppose on others, which then makes us look hypocritical in the court of public opinion, which is an example of losing the war within. And then by extension, we lose the war external. To win the war within, you must master yourself. You must integrate your shadow. I wrote about this in Biblical Bachelor. You must integrate your shadow. Now, I liken this to the old movie in Peter Pan, where his shadow got separated from him, and Wendy had to sew it back on him. Well, too many of us would just leave our shadow behind. Even shows like Rick and Morty talk about getting rid of your toxins and how you can't, because then you'll have to reabsorb them because they're part of who you are. But yet so many of us think to be healthy, we must get rid of the worst parts of ourselves. Well, if you can, I wish you good luck. The problem is most of us cannot do that. Instead, we attempt to isolate it. And in doing so, we cripple ourselves and we allow ourselves to get soft. We must integrate our shadows so that we can then attempt to control them and understand the double duality of our own being, so then we can concentrate on the war against the external world instead of falling prey to the fight and conflicts within ourselves. I realize this might be really difficult to conceptualize. I had a hard time with it initially as well. But my friends, we need to rise above the everyday normie talking points. Because the normies, when I say normie, I mean the traditional, a shrink of, if you Google it and it comes up, that's normie advice. Normie advice is go to therapy. Normie advice is, self-evaluate and all this kind of stuff, which, look, if you haven't started at all, that might be a good starting point. But that is not what is going to really get you to move ahead. Because a lot of times with what I see normie advice gives you basically just avoid accountability. No. It is only through accepting accountability that you can be free. It is only through accepting the worst part of yourselves, not negating it, not ignoring it, not passing it off as no big deal. No, you have to accept these things. You have to accept them so then you can be accountable for the worst parts of yourself and then you can utilize them. I am not saying for you to just act like a victim and say you can't control it. No, that's not how you win. That's how you become a victim in your own life, a passenger in your own life, and how you feel powerless. It is only through accepting accountability that you can become better and you can become powerful. My friends, I really want you to become a master of yourself. I know that might seem hippie, woo-woo, out there. I totally understand. Trust me, I do. But here's the reason why I want you to really understand yourself to win the war within. Because then you will be leaps and bounds ahead of everybody around you, and you will attract like-minded people who are already in the minority. You know, we like to talk about minorities when it comes to race and whatnot, but the ultimate minority is both in class and in philosophy, in mindset. That is the ultimate minority, are people who sacrifice their weakness. They sacrifice their old self. They lose what they had to gain what they want. That is how you achieve in life. You cannot have one foot out the door and one foot in the door. Because then you're in no man's land. And too many people are in no man's land. I'd argue it's almost better to have 2 foot in the blue pill world than to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Because then you're in no man's land. You need to have courage. You need to have bravery. Today, courage and bravery don't really mean anything. They think that if you're just outside the norm of gender and whatnot, that makes you a hero or brave. Not the firefighters or the cops who are the actual brave people out here, but being someone that has no gender at all makes you a hero. No, I don't think that's true. I admire people who are willing to accept who they are, you know, as long as it's in the confines of the law. But that doesn't make you a hero. That just means you're on the journey of self-discovery like everyone else on Earth. My friends, to win the war within, you must understand your foe. And your foe is actually the same person. Your foe and your enemy and your ally are the same person in the war within. And that is why it can be confusing. That is why it's difficult to really conceptualize and ultimately conquer and win. But you have to be able to make the distinctions of yourself from the good and the bad, the lightness and the darkness. And then you must then integrate the two together and then control them. Create someone new who is different, stronger, more resilient, ready to conquest the outside world. I hope this made sense. I realize this might be a little bit hippie, out there, weird, above some people's pay grade. It might just fly over your head. I understand that. I hope that that's not the case. But my friends, I really want you to challenge yourself. I want you to really understand what it is you stand to gain and to lose by ignoring the advice that we've discussed today. I invite you to explore the parts of yourself that maybe you don't want to, maybe that are uncomfortable. Because that's where you will grow the most. That is where you will learn to become the best version of yourself. You need to understand yourself to understand which version you want to become or that deserves to even exist. In the meantime, my friends, thank you for your time on this Sunday morning. My friends, God bless you. God bless your families and God bless America. I hope that this wasn't too over your head. I hope that you enjoyed it. In the meantime, let's win the war and run the race and try to get out of the rat race. If you have any thoughts you want to share, you can find me on X at Sheep Get Sheared. and we can discuss it more. If you want to DM me, you're welcome to. My DMs are open. My friends, God bless you. Have a great day. I'm out of here. Peace.